is Audible.
Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are. The 25th Anniversary Edition by Bob Frizell, narrated by Bob Frizell, published by North Atlantic Books. You can find the meditations and illustrations on the PDF that comes with this audiobook. Foreword to the second edition by Richard Grossinger. In October of 1992, I reached a point that I couldn't see my way past or through. My frames of reference, personal, relational, spiritual, cosmic, they all seemed either inauthentic or futile. A new issue of Common Ground, the Northern California Research Guide, lay on the floor in a stack of recycling papers. Without thinking that I was seeking anything concrete, I picked it up and opened it, almost like a game of divination. At the top of a random page was East Bay Rebirthing Center, followed by the name Bob Frizell. I had known about rebirthing for a long time. I had done many ritual and psychospiritual processes similar to rebirthing, and I wasn't particularly attracted to it. Yet at that moment, I chose to pick up the phone and call Bob Frizell. He lived some 20 blocks from me, just over the Oakland line from Berkeley. On the phone, he was non-committal, merely scheduling an appointment. I took notes on how to get there. I brought my dark cloud with me. Bob said almost immediately, "The gap between the way in which you've evolved and the way in which you haven't is getting greater and greater with the years. And it's now almost large enough to kill you." We began with his demonstrating how to breathe. He took breaths at varying speeds and in different rhythms. They all had one component. They were deep, true breaths. They were meant to be pranic winds, blowing through not just the lungs and vessel of a cellular body, but his energy bodies as well. His breaths had nothing to do with hyperventilating as an altered state of consciousness. They had to do with cleaning out the body, like sweeping the dust and the cobwebs from a house that hadn't been cleaned in 40 years. They had to do with breathing as letting go, as a trusting of one's higher self and the universe itself. Bob wanted me to imitate his breathing. He wasn't willing to begin our work until he was sure that I could do at least a passable facsimile of it. It was difficult at first. Some part of me, even in my bleak mood, even with the hope of release and revelation, did not want to breathe this hard. My sessions with Bob consisted solely of this breathing. I felt like a person lighting his own pilot and then summoning a deep fire from within it. When I got a blaze going, I sustained its roar as long as I could, traveling on its transformation of oxygen, and I hoped prana, into other realms and constellations. It was a delicate, porous, fluttering cooperative energy. It was usually gentle. It always made me so ravenously hungry that either at the end of the session or during bathroom breaks, I had to coax a few almonds out of Bob's kitchen jar, or a slice of bread from the whole wheat loaf sitting beside the knife next to the sink. The breath journey always let me down gently. It's like a parachute landing from a dream to another dream. Bob was my guide. He said little. Mostly, he reminded me to keep breathing. That is, to warn me when my breathing had gotten shallow. Otherwise, he sat there, traveling beside me in a parallel universe. A slow cosmic music repeating on a loop, that never seemed like mere repetition, but more like a staircase headed down, down. Well, it guided my journeys with Bob. The shades were drawn. Babaji, Jesus, and other masters stared from posters on the walls. Their gaze was so all-knowing. It little mattered that they were mere paper replicas of faded images. They carried light. This little bit left of them recognized my higher self. 3 cats bounded in and out of the window and either sat on my legs or brushed by my head as the process required. They had attended so many rebirthing sessions that they knew how and when to help. They were clearly the Egyptian others of California cats. At the end of the first session, I gave Bob a catalog of our publishing, North Atlantic Books and Frog Limited. After the 3rd or 4th session, he asked me about how we ended up doing Richard Hoagland's Monuments on Mars and other books about the face and the city on Mars. As we talked, I learned that he was involved in an esoteric tradition that reinterpreted the face and the city in light of ancient and intergalactic events. I thought maybe he could write a book about this version of the Martian mysteries. He came to my house, and after viewing a basketball game together, we sat for hours watching Drunvalo Melchizedek lecture. I realized that Bob stood at the juncture of 2 deeply submerged mystery churches. Leonard Orr's Rebirthing, with its roots in the immortal saints and yogis of India, and Drunvalo Melchizedek's sacred geometry and Pueblo millenary religion, with its references to obscure branches of theosophy and uncharted bridges between science fiction legends and symbolic truths masked in interplanetary tales. Bob stood there, much in the way he practiced rebirthing, as a silent guide, an intentional naive asking to be filled with higher wisdom. Bob was also in the lineage of Christian Rosenkreutz, who was invited to an alchemical wedding within a ceremony that we ourselves, centuries later, still await the meaning of. All of a sudden ariseth so horrible a tempest that I imagine no other but that through its mighty force the hill whereon my little house was founded would fly in pieces. Behold, it was a fair and glorious lady, whose garments were all sky color, and curiously like heaven bespangled with golden stars. In her right hand she bare a trumpet of beaten gold, whereon a name was engraven, which I could well read in, but am as yet forbidden to reveal it. Shaking the hill with her trumpet, she left him a letter. Trembling, he opened it to find words in golden letters on an azure field. This day, this, the royal wedding is. As soon as I read this letter, Rosenkreutz tells us, I was presently like to have fainted away. All my hair stood on end, and a cold sweat trickled down my whole body. For this was the famous wedding, the wedding of metal and spirit, of time and space, of Alpha and Omega. The ceremony, unless with diligence thou bathe, the wedding can't thee harmless save. Precisely 300 years later, the alchemical wedding is located in the fragile and wounded ecology of the Earth. The tempest is now pole shift, global warming, ozone layer deterioration, false prophets. The lady no longer carries a trumpet or delivers mail, but speaks in riddles, through mediums and walk-ins. The lady serves as proxy for those in the Pleiades, the 13th dimension, and among colonies we imagine on or in our neighboring worlds of Venus and Mars. Leonard Orr said, "The great immortals are not hiding from us. It's we who are hiding from them." Orr also said, "Most people love physical death more than eternal life. But eternal life is pleasurable. All the immortals I have met, they're all having a great time." In this book, Bob has told his own story in his own words. He makes no attempt to turn millennial mysteries into newspaper facts or self-help instructions. His book is called Nothing in This Book is True, but it's exactly how things are, not because the things in it are fictive, but because their essential nature is unknowable in simple time and space. Not because he's satirizing New Age channeling and apocalypticism, as some viewers mistakenly thought, but because he understands the irony of our situation, trapped between the implacability of doom prophecies and the daily opportunity we have to rebirth, not only our own lives, but our past histories, our fates, our loved ones, and in fact, the whole cosmos. The story he tells is one of many stories, and also one of many versions of one of many stories. It's a story we're living, and it's a story that we are changing to such a degree that it's becoming unrecognizable, even as it's being absolutely and unambiguously revealed for what it is. So that's why nothing is true, and yet that same nothing is certainly how things are. Anyone who doesn't realize this fundamental paradox of our situation is stuck in one or another prison mythology. Rebirthing and the flower of life are not mythologies. They are acts conferring their own meanings. Accompanied by his feline seers, Bob himself is every man, every woman too, a silent spirit guide to a journey each of us must take ourselves, a voice warning of the terrible things that'll happen, but only if we addict ourselves to a vision of the terrible things that will happen. One day I came in for a session particularly stricken and bereft. I told Bob a sad tale of stuff going wrong in my life. I made it sound totally hopeless. It sounded totally hopeless to me as I was saying it. Then I took a deep breath, stared at Babaji and crew, smiled and said, "But it's okay." It wasn't just a line. I felt at that moment utterly pure in my heart and my intention to be. "It is," Bob said. "It is okay, but only if you say so. Your word must be enough." So I leave it with readers to decide if this is all true or none of it's true. Because in the end, your own word must be enough. For this lifetime and for all lifetimes and universes to come. In fact, your word is the only thing that will get you through. Preface to the 25th Anniversary Edition by Bob Frizell. Has it really been 25 years? In many ways, it seems like only yesterday, when a guy named Richard first came to me as a breathwork client. I called it rebirthing at the time. Though skeptical at first, he had an unexpected experience in that first session that caused him to sit up and to take notice. And he then came for 29 additional weekly sessions. During that time, a mutual understanding and trust quickly developed between us, and it led to a most unexpected result. Yes, I learned that Richard owned a publishing company. And no, I was not auditioning to write a book. In fact, I had internally decided just 4 years earlier, when asked to co-author a book with a breathwork client, and upon learning that she was in fact suggesting that we write a book proposal that we would then use to seek a publisher. Well, that the only way I would ever write a book was if a publisher came to me and asked me to do so. Hey, I thought I was safe. But that, of course, is exactly what happened. Prior to this fateful meeting in October of 1992, for the previous 20 years, I'd been an active seeker. I was motivated primarily by an intense desire to heal myself of a crippling low back injury. Upon realizing that everything is a function of consciousness that can only be realized by looking inside, well, I dedicated myself to exploring the gap between who we think we are and who we really are. Then I was looking for ways of taking out of the realm of conceptual understanding and making it real in my life. Breathwork became my primary tool for doing so. It was a technique that was creating real and lasting healing and transformation in my life, as well as in the lives of my clients. Now back to Richard. I quickly learned that his company, North Atlantic Books, had published Richard Hoagland's book, The Monuments of Mars. Since I had recently come across new and essential missing information regarding the unity of life that I knew I needed to be aware of, and since it originally expressed itself in a most unsuspecting way, in the form of other life forms throughout the cosmos, with Mars being one of the centers of attention. Well, I continually pressed Richard for more and more information. And of course, I willingly shared with him all of what I was learning. So one day, I received a phone call from Richard asking me if I would consider writing a book on what he termed the esoteric meaning of the monuments of Mars. And though my first thought was, no, I'm not an author, well, I suddenly remembered my decision of 4 years earlier, and I instantly realized that there were higher forces at work here. Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are. Quickly, and to my complete surprise, and through word of mouth, because not one dime was ever spent on marketing. Well, it quickly became an overnight sensation. The enormous amount of feedback I've received has been extremely satisfying. As nothing grew in popularity, I was receiving about 50 handwritten letters per week, totaling well into the thousands. They were telling me how helpful my book was in the lives of these people. Well, I'm grateful to know that I've contributed to so many people in this way. It has subsequently been published in 25 languages. It's sold in excess of 500,000 copies, and it continues to be well received to this day. As a result, I've been invited to give my workshops throughout North America, Europe, and Australia. In this special edition, I've kept intact the basic message of the previous edition. I've also expanded upon it by including significant updates and additions, including 10 completely new chapters. I detail from a big picture perspective the enormous infusion of higher dimensional energy that's dramatically raising the vibratory rate of the planet and everyone on it. I also give the details of the personal transformation that we must make if we're to survive and thrive, so that we can catch the ride into higher consciousness, and to do it in a way that enables Mother Earth to reach critical mass and to become lit from within. This is the story of nothing less than the birth of a new humanity, of the co-creation of heaven on earth. For 13,000 years, we've been in separation. We see everything as polarized, as good or bad, up or down, hot or cold. We judge everything that happens. The very act of judgment keeps us in this mode of perceiving. As an example of this separate way of looking at life, if your body gets cold, you think of a heater. You think of something outside of yourself. This has led to our increasing dependence on technology. And while there have been many amazing advancements in technology, there's also a downside. We've missed the fact that the more technologically advanced we are, the more ignorant we're becoming. We're increasingly separating ourselves from the one spirit, and we are weakening. We become weaker when we keep giving away our power to technology, that is, to external objects. We then become dependent upon these objects, and we soon get to the point where we can't do anything for ourselves. We also become habituated to seeking and obeying outside authority. Oneness does not understand this. It doesn't know what needing anything means. Aboriginals and other indigenous people, they don't know what need means. Whatever they need, it just appears because they're in harmony with nature. The Hopi don't even have words for anything outside themselves. They would speak, for example, of a bird that's perched on a tree branch that is within them. Well, we've stepped outside of this balance, and at the moment, we are learning how to step back in. If we really knew, we could just think the thought, and it is so. We have the capacity for changing anything in the reality from within. I use the reality to refer to the outer world, including life situations, circumstances, and so on. Many of us feel that we're just a person with no power and no say regarding how things are in creation. The greater truth is that we can change anything in our environment under certain circumstances, when we're in unity and not in separation. The Spirit of God can move right through you. The right brain is our connection to all that is. It's holistic, intuitive, experiential, and knows only momentary time, the eternal now. It's also able to intuit the oneness like a 4 or 5-year-old looking up at the night sky. The left brain sees dots and does not connect them. It's logical, and it's locked into linear time, so it's never in the present moment. It needs to see beyond any doubt that separation is an illusion. It must be shown unity in a series of logical steps, as I will do by showing you the holographic universe through the universal language of sacred geometry, and by showing you how the reality that we think that we see out there is really a holographic projection of our consciousness. When the mind truly sees that there's only one spirit moving through everything, that there's only one creation pattern, only one law moving through all things, a relaxation occurs. The corpus callosum opens up, and communication takes place between both sides of the brain. Things can begin to happen at this point that you yourself would not allow until you are certain that there's only oneness. 16,000 years ago, we violated galactic law. We were on a very high level of awareness at the time, far beyond where we are now. But by committing a certain illegal act, we fell many dimensional levels until we landed in this dense aspect of the reality. We stopped breathing in the manner that we formerly utilized, and this caused the prana, the life force energy, to bypass the pineal gland. And the direct result of that is separation. So we now experience ourselves as inside a body, and we're looking out at a world that is not us. There are no accidents, however. In the cosmic scheme of things, this fall was necessary in order to allow for a greater possibility. We're now about to leave this place. The whole world is. We have only a short time left before we'll no longer be in separation. This is not going to be happening someday. It's happening now. We live in a time that can be deeply moving, but first, you must be listening with your heart. When you are, you can begin to find a common language that's beyond right and wrong, good and evil. Your higher self is still within you, and it functions well beyond the capabilities of your mind. Reconnecting with the severed aspect of ourselves gives us access to our unlimited potential, where we have reliable access to an infinite supply of inner peace, unconditional love, joy, creative expression, and wisdom. This is the energy of Divine Creator. It's the energy of Source. We must first go down in the process of reconnecting and reclaim our childlike innocence. We must first connect with our lower self. The lower self is our subconscious mind, and it's a child, about 2 to 6 years old. Reconnecting and fully reclaiming our childlike innocence is code for the healing work that needs to happen. In the chapters that follow, I'll show you exactly how to do that. Perhaps you're among those who have always felt that there's much more to our existence than we've been led to believe, and you've always felt that we're headed somewhere. But you may not know that the speed at which we're evolving is unheard of in the universe, thanks to a wildly successful interplanetary experiment conducted in 1972. These adventures in other dimensional reality are coming to fruition on Earth right now. You will be guided through the ancient mystery schools, the Naacal Mystery School in Lemuria and Atlantis, and then onto the two 12-year Egyptian schools, culminating with the final initiation in the Great Pyramid and the ascent into Christ consciousness. Around the circles and spirals of sacred geometry, in and out of the magic of circular breathing and the activation of the light body, even surviving the potentially cataclysmic pole shifts intact, we will eventually assemble internally our own Merkaba, the universal pattern of creation, and join the Ascended Masters. We will meet the forces working to advance our evolution of consciousness and those seeking to block it. When we reach critical mass, Mother Earth will shift into a higher dimensional level. Many galactic presences have already gathered around our planet, and they're watching and waiting to observe this unprecedented event. This is a time of great celebration as we move out of the darkness and into the light. It means that the veils will be lifted. We'll remember and live our intimate connection to all of life. We will be allowed to reunite with our cosmic brothers and to move about the universe. We will completely redefine what it means to be human. Chapter 1. First Contact. Everyone is on a journey of some sort. Everyone has questions about the meaning of life and we listen whenever a small part of this quest is undertaken and new information is revealed. It all began for me back in 1972 when I discovered, at the suggestion of a friend, a classic piece of literature called The Book, On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are by Alan Watts. Since my overt aim was to become a better bowler, I was searching for a way to calm and center myself so I could enhance my performance in pressure situations. So I'm not sure why my friend recommended this to me, but it hardly matters. What this book did was rekindle a spark with me, a deep inner resonance. It fostered an inner awakening that quickly became a wildfire, fueled by the fire of purpose that continues to burn brightly to this day. As a result of my growing realization that we're much more than just our limited identity, I began soaking up as much information as I could get. I read a number of books by Watts and other authors. I learned transcendental meditation. Oh, and my bowling game improved dramatically. I took the most popular seminar of the day, the 2-weekend S training. And then I immersed myself in a conscious breathing technique that was known as rebirthing. With all this input, and with the aid of numerous teachers, I experienced a quantum leap in personal growth. I was awakening from a deep slumber. And because I was motivated by a deep desire to learn, I felt quite confident that whatever I needed to know would appear whenever I needed to know it. And that's exactly what has happened. This, then, is the story of my continuing personal journey of discovery, of how I reached a turning point after 12 years of emotional body training, when I began to realize that there was indeed missing information that I needed to be aware of. It made no difference that I had no idea what the particulars could be, let alone when and how they would begin to reveal themselves. I knew I already had the necessary ingredients: 100% intention, along with the willingness to follow the spirit within without hesitation. As a result, my trip has been magical in every way. I've been guided to be in the right places at the right times, to meet the perfect people who have given me exactly what I needed to stay on the path. This has proven to be a never-ending journey. It all began innocently enough in January of 1991 when I was leading a week-long training at Campbell Hot Springs. And at that time, it was a rebirthing center of Leonard Orr's. It's near Sierraville, California. Leonard Orr is the founder of a breathwork process that he termed rebirthing. I spent most of 1980 training with him, and I've been a professional teacher of conscious breathing ever since. Though my initial motivation was out of necessity, I was looking for a way to heal a low back injury. Breathwork quickly developed a life of its own for me. For 30 years now, I've refined and reinvented it, and in its current incarnation, it's a technique that I call breath alchemy. In simplest terms, breath alchemy is a tool for helping you in discovering and mastering your innate ability to transform your limiting subconscious belief systems into powerful, purposeful, life-enhancing guidance systems so you can be truly present, joyful, and peaceful in all areas of your life. More about that later. Well, I always enjoyed my time at Campbell Hot Springs. It covers 680 acres of pure Sierra wilderness, and it's located right in the middle of nowhere. And that's just my kind of place. In addition, There was always something special, something magical about the trainings, and this week was no exception. So if that was all that happened, I would have been content with my stay there and departed looking forward to my next visit. But then I met Doug. Just prior to the conclusion of the week's events on Friday evening, I glanced at a book that he left in the lunchroom. It was called Spacegate, The Veil Removed by George Series Hatton. It was full of fascinating, frightening, unbelievable information about UFOs, aliens, cover-ups, and conspiracies. I had only a short time to glance through it, then it was time for the seminar. As soon as the class concluded, there was Doug, standing in the hallway, almost as if he was waiting for me. I told him what I had seen, and I asked for an explanation. We talked for hours in a hallway that, unlike the seminar room, was not heated. And yes, it does get cold at night at 6,000 feet in the Sierra in January. We'll come back to our conversation in a moment, but first, let me fill you in with a bit of background information. The beginnings of the modern UFO era are often traced to an Idaho pilot and businessman named Kenneth Arnold, who witnessed 9 UFOs in June of 1947 while flying over the state of Washington. He compared the flight of these unknown objects to a saucer skipping across water, which resulted in the creation of the term flying saucers. Arnold's experience was one of almost 900 sightings across the U.S. that summer, and this kicked off a nationwide UFO frenzy. What neither Arnold nor the rest of the world knew was that the U.S. military was already busy with secret full-scale investigations of the phenomena, quite likely the direct result of the many UFO sightings by military personnel towards the end of World War II. Foo Fighters, they were called. Oh, we thought they were secret weapons of the Germans. The Germans thought they were ours. As early as 1948, before the cover-up was fully implemented, top-secret studies by the military and the FBI had concluded that UFOs were real, that they were metallic disc-shaped craft, capable of great speeds and evasive maneuvers, and of unknown origin. Subsequent studies concluded that the craft were most likely extraterrestrial. Well, of course, the public was not let in on these conclusions. In fact, the existence of these studies was kept secret until 1976. Okay, now that we have a bit of background, let's get back to Doug. Our exchange was truly an amazing experience. He answered all of my questions with a great deal of patience and understanding. And as improbable as it seemed, I now knew that the next phase of my journey had begun. What it would eventually lead to far surpassed even my wildest and most fanciful dreams. Then, as we finally parted for the evening, he gave me the book and a manuscript written by Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper is now honorably discharged from the Navy. He states that in 1972, he saw 2 reports relating to government involvement with alien creatures while he was working as a quartermaster with an intelligence briefing team for U.S. Admiral Bernard A. Cleary, who was then Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. Bill served in that capacity from 1970 to 1973. He states that the 2 reports he saw were Project Grudge Blue Book Report number 13 and Majority Briefing. The Grudge report he saw contained about 25 black and white photos of alien life forms and information about them. The majority report had no photographs, Bill said, but contained information about the government's growing concern with the alien interference on this planet. Doug also said that he had a number of videotapes and he'd be willing to show them to me. Well, I stayed up most of that night reading and then spent much of the next day watching these videos. To summarize what I learned, there was a great deal of UFO activity in the late 1940s, and most of it was in the New Mexico area. This included numerous incidents of downed or crashed alien craft, the most famous being the July 1947 recovery of a crashed UFO on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Oh yeah, and along with 3 or 4 alien bodies. At the time, Roswell was the home of the Roswell Army Airfield of the 8th Air Force, which housed the 509th Bomb Group, the only squadron in the world entrusted with atomic weapons. Roswell residents on the fateful evening of July 2nd saw a bright object streak across the sky. It exploded about 70 miles outside of town, scattering debris over a large area. Rancher William Mack Brazel found the strange metallic fragments, and days later he reported the matter to authorities. Roswell intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel was dispatched to the scene to collect the wreckage. Marcel was certain that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft. He said the foil, no thicker than that in a package of cigarettes, was virtually indestructible. It was, in his words, not of this earth. Base Commander Colonel William H. Blanchard called in press liaison Lieutenant Walter Haut, who issued the following press release. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse A. Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. Action was immediately taken, and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Marcel to higher headquarters. When the local newspaper tried to put this out, the wire service was interrupted. A message came across to the local news service stating that they were to cease transmission immediately, that what they were transmitting concerned the national security. The message was from the FBI. Major Marcel was told to load the wreckage onto a B-29 and fly it to 8th Air Force headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, where General Roger M. Ramey took control of the debris. He ordered Marcel and others to keep quiet and issued another press release saying that the incident was nothing more than a crashed weather balloon. As he and Marcel posed for reporters, the real wreckage was flown to Ohio under armored guard. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio was the original center for all material of this type to be brought together. It was headquarters for the Foreign Technologies Division of the U.S. Air Force. and it later became headquarters for the Alien Technology Division of the United States Air Force. Then, two craft were found in February and March of 1948 near Aztec, New Mexico. 17 alien bodies were recovered. Oh yeah, along with a huge number of human body parts. Well, this immediately lifted the security lid to above top secret. The next significant occurrence was in 1949, and again, it was near Roswell. 2 discs crashed, and 5 alien bodies were recovered. In combing the area to make sure that all the wreckage was picked up, a live alien was found wandering in the desert. He was captured and named EB, for extraterrestrial biological entity. EB was taken to Los Alamos, where he was placed in a Faraday shield environment. Why? Because he had the ability to read the thoughts of and to transmit thoughts to people on the outside. He also had the ability, through a device that he wore around his waist, to literally walk through the walls. Well, EB became ill, and there was an unsuccessful attempt to save him. In the attempt, and also in an attempt to gain favor with this technologically superior race, well, they began broadcasting into space for help. They hoped to make friendly contact so the aliens would see us as a benevolent people trying to help one of theirs. We realized that in any military confrontation, we would have had no chance whatsoever. EB died in June of 1952, and as of yet, there was no answer from our attempts to communicate. The movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial was the thinly veiled story of EB. In real life, it was an Air Force officer, not a little boy, who developed a close relationship with EB. When EB died, the officer was deeply hurt. He'd lost a friend. In the movie, E.T. becomes very ill, and the boy plays the role of the Air Force officer. But in the film, he lived. E.T. Phone Home was Project Sigma, the attempt to establish contact with the aliens. By the way, in a special White House screening of the movie, President Reagan whispered in Steven Spielberg's ear, "You know, there's fewer than 6 people in this room who know the real truth of the matter." In 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower's first year in office, at least 10 more crash discs were recovered, along with 26 dead and 4 live aliens. In early 1953, the new president turned to friend and fellow member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Nelson Rockefeller, for help. They began planning the secret structure of Alien Task Supervision, which was to become reality within 1 year. The idea for MJ-12 was born. Majesty 12, MJ-12, also known as Majority 12, was created early in 1954 to oversee and conduct all covert activities concerning the alien question. It consisted, according to Bill Cooper, of Rockefeller, Director of the CIA, Allen Dulles, Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, Secretary of Defense, Charles E. Wilson, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Arthur W. Radford, Director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, 6 men from the Executive Committee of the Council on Foreign Relations, who were known as the Wise Men, 6 men from the Executive Committee of the Jason Group, a secret group formed during the Manhattan Project, and Dr. Edward Thaler. No order could be given from the 19-member group, and no action could be taken without a majority vote of 12 in favor, thus majority 12. It is significant that Eisenhower, as well as the first 6 MJ-12 members from the government, were also members of the Council on Foreign Relations. This gave control of the most secret and powerful group in government to a special interest club that was itself controlled by the Illuminati. A contingency plan was formed by MJ-12 to deceive anyone who came close to the truth. It was known as Majestic 12, also symbolized by MJ-12, but it's a fraud, and it has successfully thrown most of the researchers off the trail. The next alleged major event occurred in 1954, when our government made contact with a race of aliens that has since become known as the Greys. Well, evidently, they landed at Edwards Air Force Base, met with President Eisenhower, and signed a formal treaty. According to Bill Cooper, the treaty stated, "The aliens would not interfere in our affairs, and we would not interfere in theirs. We would keep their presence on Earth a secret. They would furnish us with advanced technology and would help us in our technological development. They would not make any treaty with any other Earth nation. They could abduct humans on a limited and periodic basis for the purpose of medical examination and monitoring of our development, with the stipulation that the humans would not be harmed, would be returned to their point of abduction, that the humans would have no memory of the event, and the alien nation would furnish MJ-12 with a list of all human contacts and abductees on a regularly scheduled basis. It was also agreed that bases would be constructed underground for the use of the alien nation, and that 2 bases would be constructed for the joint use of the alien nation and the U.S. government. Exchange of technology would take place in the jointly occupied bases. Well, shortly thereafter, 2 outcomes became clear. Number 1, the Greys had ignored the terms of the treaty by abducting far more humans than they said they would. They also carried out mutilations, both human and animal. The Greys said that this was necessary for their survival, that they were a dying race, and that their genetic material had deteriorated to the point to where they were no longer able to reproduce. They said they needed our genetic material, or they would be history. Well, our weapons were no match for theirs. As a result, it was necessary to remain on a friendly basis with the aliens, at least until we could develop weapon systems that might combat them. Well, of course, an above top secret security lid was put on this, with government agencies formed to investigate. The above barely scratches the surface. There was much more information, all equally mind-blowing, as if straight out of a science fiction book. With all the ace paperback qualities to the story, it would have been all too easy to just laugh it off as the product of someone's imagination, or the hoax of the century. And that certainly was the prevailing attitude of the day. But for me, at the risk of being labeled a kook, or even worse, one of those conspiracy theory nuts, well, it all fit, like the missing piece of a puzzle. It answered a lot of questions. It felt right intuitively. And one of the many results of my 12 years of breathwork was a highly developed intuition. My intuition said yes to this, and I trusted it. Reality check. I went back home bursting with this new information. I couldn't wait to tell anyone and everyone who would listen. Well, I could tell you the boring details, but I won't. I could tell you how it cost me a client or two, and probably a friendship or two. I could tell you how, much to my surprise, almost no one wanted to hear it. Almost. I did find a few exceptions. But hey, I learned quickly. I soon became very careful about volunteering this information, and I even began to question it myself. I was no stranger to the possibility that what passes for truth in the mainstream media is in fact a thinly disguised veil for the real workings of governments. But could it have really gone this far? Were there really little gray aliens behind the scenes, giving us Star Trek-type technology in exchange for abducting some of us and genetically experimenting on those unfortunates? Could I really trust my intuition this far, or had I gone off the deep end? Well, I went to the Whole Life Expo in San Francisco in April, and I heard a presentation by two of the more moderate researchers, Stanton Friedman and William Moore. They both agreed about the Roswell incident. In fact, both had researched it ad nauseum. However, Moore in particular went out of his way to paint Bill Cooper as a kook who could not be trusted. Was I convinced? No. Did it open up some new doubts? Yes. I also picked up a video. It was titled Hoagland's Mars, the NASA Cydonia Briefings, and I was introduced to this most interesting study regarding alleged monuments on Mars. Why hadn't the media reported on this? Well, I pretty much closed up shop on all of this after the expo. There was nowhere to go with it. Besides, I had a life to live, and this was getting me nowhere fast. I did, however, connect with a group of like-minded people who met on a monthly basis. I attended a few of their meetings and received their regular mailings. In June of 1992, I received a fateful letter in the mail. June 1st, 1992. Greetings. On Sunday, June 14th, I'll be showing the first of 5 videos of Drunvalo Melchizedek's Dallas, Texas workshop. Each video is approximately 5 hours. The following describes the focus of these videos. Resurrection, moving consciously into the next vibratory dimension, can and must be experienced and lived if we are to survive into the 21st century. Our planet, whether you're aware of it or not, is already deep into this transformation. The ascension process begins when a human remembers his or her crystal energy field. There is a field of energy that is 55 feet around the body, that is geometrical and crystalline in nature. The remembering of this field is triggered by a series of metaphysical drawings that are light replicas of the 44+2 chromosomes in every cell of your body, and specifically in your pineal gland. This will activate a higher purpose of the pineal gland, which is to allow a forgotten ancient way of breathing to return. The breathing is a key to higher consciousness and dimensional translation. By simply breathing in a different way than we do now, and by directing the pranic flow through the human crystal field, a new world will literally open onto you. This breathing will allow you to make direct contact with your higher self so that trusted and clear guidance can come from within. It'll give you unparalleled protection while you're in the ascension process. It'll give you a means to heal yourself and later others. This breathing will allow you to remember who you are and your intimate connection with God. This video workshop is presented by Drunvalo Melchizedek. The teaching itself comes from Alpha and Omega, Order of Melchizedek, and from Thoth, the Egyptian Atlantean, also known as Hermes of Greece, who resurrected long ago and is an immortal who was physically living on Earth until just a few months ago. I look forward to your participation. The information is extremely significant for your ascension process. Love and light, Madeline Burley Allen. As I gazed at this letter, I was instantly engaged. It spoke of ascension and breathing as being the keys to higher consciousness. And I was especially intrigued by the mention of the Ascended Master, the guy named Thoth, whom I would soon discover has been alive and in the same body for 52,000 years. It looked too good. This was exactly what I was learning in breathwork. Well, even though it seemed like an enormous commitment, to sit and watch 25 hours of video, and it actually turned out to be 32 hours. Well, I responded with an immediate yes. I had no idea what to expect. I just knew that I wanted to go. The videos were part of a 4-day workshop titled The Flower of Life. It was led by Drunvalo Melchizedek. Was this a real person? What kind of a name was this? What followed was my introduction to some of the most engaging, enlightening, and totally mind-blowing information that I had ever experienced. And in addition, Drunvalo had a presence, a sincerity, a lack of judgment, a total integration of his material, the likes of which I had never seen. I was so impressed that I purchased the videos, and they were my preferred source of entertainment for many weeks to come. So, what did Drunvalo have to say that was so astonishing? Well, for one, the letter's mention of breathing and ascension is what got me there, and I was not disappointed. But how did that relate to UFOs and little gray aliens? Very good questions, so stay tuned. But first, we need to look at a pair of additional riddles. Chapter 2. What's going on? I received 3 more videos from Doug. The first was a series of reports produced by Las Vegas TV station KLAS, in which one Bob Lazar claimed that Americans were working on alien craft at a Nevada site called Area 51. Lazar claims that he was hired by the Navy as an engineer on a top secret project. He was under the impression that he's going to be working on an advanced propulsion system. He says he was flown from Las Vegas to Groom Lake, put on a windowless bus, and then driven about 10 miles south to Area S4 at the Papoose Lake dry lake bed. This is reportedly the site of 9 heavily camouflaged hangars, alleged to contain an equal number of unconventional aircraft. He said the hangar door was open as they drove up to one of them, and inside was a flying saucer. He didn't fully realize that it was of alien origin until sometime later when he was taken inside the craft. Upon seeing the diminutive size of everything, Lazar was quite convinced that this was not made for humans. The true motivation for the government to have hired them then emerged. This was a reverse engineering project, the process by which an advanced system may be used as a learning model for creating another. Lazar said the disk was constructed with 3 levels. The upper level, which he never saw, the middle level where you enter, and the lower one, where the gravity amplifiers hang down and you can access the bottom part of the craft. He said there were no obvious control panels. There were only 3 chairs, the reactor itself, and the gravity amplifiers. Underneath them were the other components of the propulsion system. Lazar claims that his first few days were spent under guard, reading briefing documents containing detailed knowledge of the aliens. These beings were the Greys, said to originate from Reticulum 4, a planet in the star system Zeta Reticuli. Reticulum 4 referred to the 4th planet out from that sun. Lazar's job, in a team of 2, involved working with the power and propulsion system of the craft. The power source, according to Lazar, was an antimatter reactor, a total annihilation system reacting matter and antimatter that is 100% efficient in its conversion of matter to energy. It was small enough to hold in your hand, yet it put out more power than our full-size nuclear power plants. This allowed the ships to produce their own gravitational fields. According to Lazar, gravity distorts time and space. It's just like if you had a waterbed and you put a bowling ball in the middle. It warps it down, and that's exactly what happens to space. So imagine that you were in a spacecraft that could exert a tremendous gravitational field by itself. You could sit on any particular place, turn on the gravity generator, and actually warp space and time and fold it. And by shutting it off, well, you'd be a tremendous distance from where you were, but time would not even have moved. When you harness gravity, you harness everything. It's the missing piece in physics. Lazar says that the technology to harness gravity not only exists, but it's being tested at S4. Element 115 is the fuel. By combining 115, antimatter is produced. Not found in the periodic chart, element 115 can be stored in lead casings. And Lazar says the government has 500 pounds of it, and it cannot be made here. According to Lazar, it has to come from a place where super heavy elements could have been produced naturally, perhaps next to a much larger sun or a binary star system where there would be greater mass. Lazar says he was fired after making a blatant security breach. He brought 5 friends to the outer perimeter of the base just to witness the test flights. As time went on, they became lax, and eventually they got caught. He was debriefed at an Air Force base north of Las Vegas. Weapons were pointed at him, his life was threatened, and personal records were erased, making him a virtual non-person. And at that point, Lazar decided to go public as an insurance policy on his life. So he went to station KLAS in Las Vegas, and he began a series of interviews with investigative reporter George Knapp. Lazar is not the only one to claim inside knowledge of the flying discs at the test site. He is, however, the only person to say so publicly. Knapp has communicated with several people who say they know of the saucer program. A technician in a highly sensitive position told him, "It's common knowledge amongst those with high security clearances that recovered alien discs are stored at the Nevada test site." A Las Vegas professional, while in the military, was stationed at the test site and says that he saw a flying disc land near Area 51, that it was quickly surrounded by security personnel, and that he was taken away and debriefed for several hours. An airman who worked at a radar installation, well, he says that he and his fellow servicemen watched UFOs flying over the Groom Mountains over a period of 5 nights. Radar indicated that these UFOs were traveling at speeds up to 7,000 miles per hour. Then they just stop on a dime. Well, he was finally ordered to turn off his sensors and to keep quiet, because what he saw did not happen. By the way, it is alleged that a program called Project Aquarius, established in 1972 to fly recovered alien spacecraft, still exists to this day. In 1997, retired Colonel Philip J. Corso, he came forth to reveal that reverse engineering was indeed a common occurrence with regard to downed alien craft. Corso, in his book, The Day After Roswell, well, he said that he led a double life in the military. On the outside, he researched and evaluated weapons systems for the Army, while deep inside the Pentagon, he was responsible for the Roswell file, the Army's darkest secret. He said the military seeded the industrial complex through reverse engineering with components discovered in the wreckage at Roswell, that this is what has led to today's integrated chips, fiber optics, lasers, and stealth technology. The second and third videos that Doug provided me, they were titled The Pleiadian Connection and Contact. And they told the story of the contacts of one Billy Meier with a group of beings from the Pleiades. Included in this presentation were a number of photos of Pleiadian beam ships that were taken by Meier. Meier, a one-armed Swiss farmer with a 6th grade education, says that his contacts began telepathically at the age of 5. And after 11 years of these communications, he had more than 130 visitations from these beings between January of 1975 and 1986. Now, Meier isn't the only person to claim extraterrestrial visitations, but he is the first to document his contacts in such stunning detail, with more than 1,000 photographs. And these are clear, daylight pictures of multiple flying discs. Now, 2 or more ships in a photo, it's almost unheard of in UFO circles, with identifiable reference points in both the foreground and background. They were all taken with an Olympus 35mm camera with a little wheel on the back to advance the film. Meier also had 8mm film footage, sound recordings, about 70 eyewitnesses, metal samples that were representative of the type the ships were made of, and reputed landing sites where the grass was pressed and swirled in a counterclockwise direction that 1 year later still had not sprung back. Now, in case you're wondering how it's done, just how do these guys successfully traverse a distance of 500 light years? Good question. Is it even possible? Well, here's an interesting explanation from the Pleiadian Connection. The ship speeds up to approximately the speed of light. At that point, the mass-speed correlation, which is the energy of the universe pressing in on the ship, is tremendous. The ships are protected by an energy screen that holds that off. But just at the right moment, they lower those screens, and all that energy is forced in against the ship. They use that energy in kind of a compression fashion to do something really unique. They convert the ship and all matter involved with it into thought. Now, they call it spiritual energy. We would think of it as thought. It no longer exists in the material frame. Well, that allows them to step outside of time and into null time, and then move that thought at a much higher speed to its destination. Then the ship rematerializes, allowing them to traverse vast distances literally at the speed of thought. It took 3.5 hours to get up enough speed to make this conversion. Then the jump literally took no time. Then it took 3.5 hours to slow down to enter our solar system. Why 3.5 hours? Well, because they need to be 153 million kilometers away from the nearest orbiting body. They need to be that far away before they can convert from null time to time. The conversion causes a rip in time, and any planet that may be too close could get pulled out of its orbit. So the jump must be made outside of the solar system. So they were 153 million kilometers away, and it took 3.5 hours to cruise through our solar system. A 5-year investigation into Meyer's allegations began in the spring of 1978. It was headed by Wendell Stevens, a retired Air Force officer who for 20 years had been one of the world's leading UFO researchers. Now, this was a private investigation, since governments do not investigate what, according to them, does not exist. The team visited the sites where the pictures were taken, and the photo scene was reconstructed for computer comparison. The investigators were impressed by the vastness of the valley, the steep drops, and the obvious difficulty of hanging models from anywhere to fake the pictures. Computer analysis of the photos by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and 2 universities found no evidence of a hoax. An IBM chemist concluded that even though most of the ingredients in the strange metal could be identified, the manufacturing process could not. It was beyond our technology and clearly not of this Earth. He claimed that the metal had to have been made in some sort of a vacuum process. The team showed the Meyer material to a variety of experts in an attempt to learn if it could be duplicated. It was estimated it would require expertise in at least a dozen different fields, that it would take at least 10,000 man-hours and more than $1 million to duplicate. Even then, computers could still spot any fabrication. The bottom line? Outside experts concluded that Meyer's story is legitimate. Yet both Friedman and Moore, they both jumped all over it in their talks at the Whole Life Expo. They were calling Meyer the hoaxer of the century. So, was Billy Meyer really being visited by the Pleiadians? Or was it just his idea of a joke? And what about Bob Lazar? Is he telling the truth? Well, if not, he certainly has an imagination. Or maybe he's one of a number of government agents purposely putting out disinformation. Part of it which may well be true, and part of which is obviously false. This is designed specifically to lead you in the wrong direction. And if it is disinformation, what are they really hiding? Those videos, coupled with the Cooper and the Spacegate material, it led me to the inevitable question: what's going on here? And speaking of what's going on, what about one of the more interesting controversies of our time? Yep, you guessed it. Did we really land on the moon? Did you see the 1978 thriller Capricorn 1? The story of our first manned mission to Mars? Hey, sounds exciting, right? Well, wait a minute. Just mere seconds prior to launch, the project director had a rather unexpected surprise for the would-be Martian visitors. Turns out that the life support system was faulty, and that NASA could not afford the publicity of a scratched mission. The plan then was to fake the Mars landing in a movie studio at a remote base and to keep the astronauts there until the mission was over. So the 3 astronauts, one of whom was played by O.J. Simpson, were pulled from the capsule, and the rocket left Earth unmanned. And it almost worked. So now let's take a look at the Apollo missions. Why would we fake them in the first place? In recalling the history of the time, at the conclusion of World War II, the U.S. acquired the majority of the rocket scientists from Germany, along with most of their related information and hardware. The confiscated information included plans for Earth satellites, as well as multi-stage rockets that would eventually be fired at North America. So, if this was in the German plans, and since our newest enemy, the USSR, also obtained German scientists and pursued the development of rockets with a great deal of enthusiasm, well, it was concluded that this weaponry might indeed be used against us someday. But why? And why would the Soviets fear us at all? After all, we were allies in the recently concluded global conflict. Well, remember, not only did we have the bomb well before them, but we also used it. Could it be that the 2 horrific explosions over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945 were intended more for the Russians, like the first shots fired in the Cold War, rather than for an already thoroughly defeated Japan? And add to this the fact that in 1953, it was discovered that the Soviets were well along in this endeavor and had already designed a rocket capable of carrying their atomic bombs. So, in the era following World War II, and extending for decades beyond, we were in the height of the Cold War. We were locked up in a nuclear arms race with no end in sight. And the space race was merely an extension of that. The technology necessary to launch the massive Saturn V rocket and an intercontinental ballistic missile was virtually the same. When the Soviet Union launched mankind's first satellite in 1957, Sputnik 1, there was grave concern that they had mastered space ahead of the U.S., and that they might use this advantage to launch a first nuclear strike from orbit. When they also put the first animal in space, then the first man in space, then achieved the first spacewalk, then the first crew of 3, and then the first ever of 2 simultaneously orbiting spacecraft, well, concern turned to fear, and then to horror, as America watched their communist enemy achieve all of these firsts with no hope in sight of ever catching up. We were on red alert. Then, President Kennedy issued an irreversible ultimatum, putting a man on the moon and returning him safely before the end of the decade. And this was in spite of the fact that one miserable failure followed another. And our only manned success to date was a 16-minute flight that didn't even achieve orbit. This was by astronaut Alan